They were the kind of men you'd salute without question. Decorated U.S. Army officers, disciplined, loyal, and fearless. But behind their medals and military code, they hid a secret so dangerous it would shock the entire world. They weren't planning battles anymore. They were planning heists. What started as two soldiers joking about robbing a jewelry store soon turned into one of the most sophisticated crime syndicates in modern history. Using the very skills the Army had taught them, tactical movement, radio encryption, precision timing, they turned their training into the blueprint for the perfect crime. Their operations stretched across Germany, Switzerland, and the United States. No alarms, no witnesses, no traces. Just a clean sweep every time they called themselves the Unit. But law enforcement would later name them the Ghost Soldiers, because every time they struck, they disappeared like smoke. Inside their circle were experts, a demolition specialist who could breach any vault, a communications officer who jammed security signals, and a logistics mastermind who coordinated every second of every move. They didn't use violence. They used precision. For years, they stayed untouchable, until greed crept in. The brotherhood that once fought side by side began to fracture under the weight of diamonds, lies, and betrayal. And when one of them broke the code, the entire empire they built on discipline and loyalty came crashing down. This isn't a story about street criminals. It's a story about soldiers, men trained to defend their country, who used that training to rob it blind. This is the true story of the U.S. Army officers who became the world's most notorious jewel thieves. It all began in 1986 on a quiet U.S. Army base in Germany. Lieutenant David Cross was a man everyone respected, disciplined, intelligent, the kind of officer others wanted to follow. His partner in everything from missions to mayhem was Sergeant Michael Mick Holloway, bold, charming, and dangerously impulsive. Together, they'd served in multiple operations overseas, where they learned the art of precision, timing, and trust. But behind their loyalty to the uniform lay something darker: frustration and greed born from years of watching others profit while they risked their lives for scraps. One cold night, after too many drinks at the base bar, Mick threw out a joke that would change everything. "With what we know, we could rob a jewelry store better than anyone." David laughed, but then paused. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. That silence between them was the moment the line was crossed. What started as a joke soon became a blueprint. They began studying security systems the same way they studied enemy maps. Mick had access to local security patrol schedules through military contacts. David used his intelligence background to learn alarm trigger patterns and bank security layouts. Their first target was a small jewelry shop in Wiesbaden. Not too guarded, not too high profile, just enough to test their skills. On the night of the heist, they moved like soldiers on a mission. They wore standard civilian clothing but communicated through coded hand signals. Mick disabled the exterior alarm using a timing device he had designed for military training exercises. David cracked the back door lock with surgical precision. In just 11 minutes, they were gone. $200,000 in diamonds, gold chains, and watches vanished without a trace. The police had nothing. The footage was useless. Blurred shadows, fast, controlled movements. It looked less like a robbery and more like a tactical extraction. No one suspected soldiers. Why would they? The thrill was intoxicating. That night, David and Mick realized they had discovered something they never found in the Army: control, power, and profit. They didn't just steal jewels, they stole a sense of freedom. Over the next few months, they quietly expanded. They recruited other soldiers from their unit, men they trusted completely, men who had skills that could make the operation flawless. One of them was Corporal Ethan Riley, a demolitions expert who could open safes using controlled microcharges that left no residue. Another was Staff Sergeant Louis Grant, a communications genius who could jam police frequencies within a 5-block radius. By 1988, their team, now 5 strong, wasn't just robbing stores. They were pulling off heists so clean that local authorities in Germany and Switzerland began to think they were dealing with professional foreign operatives. The press started calling them the Ghost Unit. Each heist was executed with military precision, code words, time synchronization down to the second, and perfectly mapped escape routes. They used stolen military transport vans, modified to carry false license plates and hidden compartments for smuggling gems across borders. Their earnings were laundered through black market dealers in Belgium and Amsterdam, places where questions weren't asked and diamonds changed hands every hour. David was the brain, cold and calculating, always thinking 5 steps ahead. Mick was the risk taker, the kind of man who made bold moves that paid off, until they didn't. But back then, they were untouchable. Every operation made them bolder. Soon, their ambitions outgrew Europe. They began planning jobs in the United States. David wanted to return home, not to serve, but to conquer. He had a vision, to use military discipline to create a criminal empire so precise it would be unstoppable. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Mick had begun spending more money than they agreed. He bought luxury cars, expensive watches, and started showing off to women in bars. David warned him, "You're drawing attention." Mick shrugged it off. "We're ghosts, remember?" But ghosts, no matter how invisible they think they are, always leave a shadow. Their next job would be their biggest, a test of whether the Ghost Unit could stay disciplined, or collapse under its own ambition. The soldiers who once fought for honor were now fighting for greed, and in that fight, someone was bound to lose. After returning to the U.S. in 1990, David Cross and Mick Holloway blended effortlessly back into civilian life. They wore suits instead of uniforms, but the discipline, the order, the soldier's mindset, it never left them. Only now, it had a new purpose. They weren't serving a flag anymore. They were serving greed. The Ghost Unit had become a silent, invisible machine. David set up a small logistics company as their cover operation. On paper, they transported luxury goods across state lines. In reality, the company's trucks carried stolen gems and high-end watches hidden in custom compartments. Mick, meanwhile, handled recruitment. He brought in new faces, a former Army pilot who could fly under radar, and an ex-military engineer who could build fake identities, IDs, and travel papers. Then came Elena. She was a gem appraiser from New York, brilliant and elegant, and unknowingly, the Ghost Unit's golden key. David met her at a private auction in Manhattan while posing as a security consultant. She introduced him to a world he didn't even know existed: private jewel collectors, off-market auctions, and underground dealers who traded stones worth millions with no paper trail. Through her, he learned the dark economics of diamonds. Once a stone was recut and reset, it became untraceable. David started a quiet relationship with her, playing the part of a charming businessman. Elena had no idea the man she was falling for was behind some of Europe's biggest unsolved robberies. Through her, the Ghost Unit discovered how to move their stolen goods without suspicion, recertify them through independent gem labs, and sell them through private brokers in Hong Kong and Antwerp. With new networks in place, they planned their first major U.S. job, a private vault inside a Fifth Avenue skyscraper. The vault belonged to a luxury jewelry exchange that stored high-value gems for multiple clients. It was one of the most secure buildings in Manhattan, and David wanted it because it represented a challenge. For weeks, they studied every detail. Luis, their tech specialist, hacked into the building's fire alarm system to understand emergency response times. Ethan used an old Army reconnaissance drone to map the rooftop and emergency exits. They even obtained a copy of the floor plan from a retired security consultant, bribed with $20,000 in cash. On the night of the heist, they executed with near-military timing. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the building's alarms went down for 6 minutes during a scheduled maintenance window. a window they had created by sending fake service orders a week earlier. Dressed as maintenance crew, they entered through the service elevator, used a forged master key, and bypassed the biometric lock with a pulse sensor, a military tool designed for battlefield medics, but now repurposed for crime. Inside, they cracked the vault using micro-explosives that sounded no louder than a soda can popping open. In under 9 minutes, they filled duffel bags with nearly $5.6 million worth of diamonds and gold. When the alarms finally came back online, the ghost unit was already gone. The robbery made headlines across the country. "Perfect precision heist leaves no trace," one newspaper wrote. The FBI was baffled. There were no fingerprints, no camera angles, no witnesses. The only clue? A small, unmarked military-grade duffel bag left behind, the same kind issued to U.S. soldiers years earlier. Agent Karen Doyle, a military background investigator with the FBI, noticed the detail immediately. She'd spent years studying patterns in organized crime. And this was different. The timing, the structure, the discipline. It felt like a mission, not a robbery. Meanwhile, Mick began slipping. Flush with money, he started, gambling heavily, buying luxury cars, and showing off to people who didn't need to know him. David warned him again. "We don't exist unless we stay invisible." But Mick wasn't listening anymore. The media's attention, the thrill, the fame, it all started getting to him. And while David stayed cold, calm, and strategic, Mick became reckless, breaking the one rule that had kept them safe. Silence. For the first time, their brotherhood was cracking. The soldiers who once trusted each other with their lives were now questioning motives, loyalty, and greed. And when the FBI began connecting the dots between that military duffel bag and a trail of former soldiers with unusual travel histories, the ghost unit realized they were no longer invisible. They had become the hunted. By early 1992, the ghost unit had become both legendary and invisible. Their heists were so clean that investigators didn't even know what kind of criminals they were dealing with. To the FBI, they weren't thieves, they were ghosts with military-grade precision. And the woman trying to catch them, Agent Karen Doyle, was the first to see the pattern that everyone else missed. Karen had a background in military intelligence before joining the Bureau. The moment she reviewed the files, she noticed details only a soldier would understand. Synchronized timing, coded radio chatter, and strategic use of diversion. "These aren't gangsters," she told her team. "They're trained." She began by investigating recent veterans with financial irregularities or foreign travel records that matched the ghost unit's known activity zones. Her search led her to Michael Holloway. On paper, Mick was a decorated soldier turned small business owner, but beneath the surface, she found strange cash transactions, offshore accounts, and luxury cars purchased in cash. Meanwhile, David Cross was living two lives, the respectable logistics entrepreneur by day and the ghost commander by night. He'd already started planning something far more ambitious than anything before, an international heist that would shake law enforcement across continents. The target was a Swiss armored convoy carrying uncut diamonds valued at over $12 million. The stones were being transferred from Antwerp to Zurich under tight security. David saw it as the perfect job, a chance to cement their legacy and vanish for good. He used his old military contacts to acquire NATO clearance documents, which they forged into fake mission orders. The plan was simple, but brilliant. Intercept the convoy under the guise of a NATO inspection, reroute it to a fake checkpoint, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. On the morning of the heist, everything unfolded like a tactical operation. The ghost unit, wearing authentic military uniforms, waved down the armored trucks at a quiet stretch near Basel. They presented fake papers, spoke fluent military codes, and ordered the drivers to follow them for a routine inspection. Within minutes, they had control of the convoy. Inside a hidden warehouse, The diamonds were transferred into a modified truck equipped with false compartments. The entire job took less than 20 minutes. By the time Swiss authorities realized what had happened, the ghost unit had already crossed into France. It was their masterpiece. But back in the US, Agent Doyle was closing in. The Swiss heist made headlines worldwide, and she immediately connected the tactical precision to the Fifth Avenue robbery. Only one group could have done both. She quietly began tracing every soldier who had served with David Cross during his time in Germany. That's when she discovered something chilling. 5 of his former unit members had vanished after discharge. No addresses, no families, no records. It was as if they had been erased. Doyle was convinced she had found her suspects, but proving it was another story. Meanwhile, inside the ghost unit, things were beginning to unravel. Mick Holloway had started drinking heavily, haunted by the fear of being caught. The guilt was eating him alive. He wanted out, but David refused to let him go. "You don't leave family," David told him coldly. "Not until the mission's complete." Mick, broken and desperate, began making mistakes. Small ones at first. He used the same credit card twice in different cities within hours. He reused burner phones instead of discarding them. Little things, but enough to catch attention. The FBI intercepted one of the phone signals near a warehouse linked to their operation. Doyle ordered a covert surveillance setup. For weeks, they watched, waiting for David or Mick to appear. Then, one night, they caught a glimpse of someone unloading boxes. Military crates marked equipment. It was enough to confirm her theory. Doyle now had her targets. She didn't know their names yet, but she knew their habits, their rhythm, their pattern. She could predict them. But David was one step ahead. He knew the walls were closing in, and that's when he decided on one final mission. Something that would make every past job look small. A heist so bold, so impossible, it would either make them legends or bury them forever. His new target wasn't a jewelry store or a vault overseas. It was the U.S. government itself. Specifically, the Treasury's secret gemstone evidence vault in Washington, D.C. For David, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, revenge, and control. For the FBI, it would become a race against time. The soldier-turned-thief was about to go to war with the very nation he once swore to protect. The Treasury heist was the ghost unit's most audacious plan yet. A target so heavily guarded it seemed impossible, even for men trained in military operations. David Cross had studied every blueprint, every guard rotation, every security protocol. This was no longer a simple robbery. It was a full-scale military operation masquerading as a criminal act. Every step had been timed, rehearsed, and mapped out, down to the second. To gain access, David relied on an old military contact who had once worked in federal security. Through careful bribery and forged credentials, they acquired temporary access passes to a lower-level service entrance. The idea was to get in unnoticed, trigger a diversion, and extract the gems before anyone realized the vault had been breached. The ghost unit had everything planned, or so David thought. On the night of the heist, Mick Holloway was assigned to handle the vault breach. David and the others coordinated exterior movements, maintaining radio silence except for pre-arranged coded phrases. At exactly 2:15 a.m., Mick entered the vault using advanced lock-picking tools and a pulse sensor to bypass the biometric lock. The operation went smoothly for the first several minutes, and the team began moving the gems into their secure containers. Then something went wrong. Mick, overwhelmed by adrenaline and greed, froze in the middle of the vault. Instead of following the plan and leaving, he tried to take more than their allocated share. In that split second, alarms blared. The room erupted in chaos. Armed guards rushed in as Mick panicked. Gunfire echoed through the vault corridors, and one of the new recruits, a young former engineer who had never seen live combat, was shot. David shouted over the radio, trying to guide the team, but the plan was unraveling faster than anyone could react. In the panic, David grabbed Mick and pulled him toward a hidden service tunnel he had memorized during reconnaissance. They ran through the narrow passageways, the sounds of shouting and sirens growing louder behind them. The rest of the team followed, narrowly avoiding the guards stationed at every exit. By the time the Treasury's security team regrouped, the ghost unit was already outside the perimeter, vanishing into the darkness. The heist was catastrophic and brilliant at the same time. The team had escaped with some of the gems, but at a cost. One member was dead, Mick was badly shaken, and the FBI was now in full pursuit. Agent Karen Doyle had her first real evidence: eyewitness accounts, surveillance footage from nearby buildings, and fragments of the stolen items traced back to known dealers linked to David Cross. Within days, Mick was on the run. Fear and guilt had consumed him. Unlike David, who remained cold and methodical, Mick's recklessness had made him vulnerable. He was eventually found in a motel near Nashville, trying to blend in but leaving a trail of small mistakes: cash withdrawals, hotel receipts, and suspicious travel records. During interrogation, Mick confessed to everything. Every heist, every stolen gem, every movement of the ghost unit came to light. He named David, the recruits, and even provided maps and schedules. Mick's betrayal was both a salvation and a curse for the authorities. It gave them names, but David Cross had already disappeared. David vanished without a trace. Unlike Mick, he had anticipated every contingency. False passports, safe houses across Europe and South America, and loyal contacts who moved the remaining jewels made him nearly impossible to locate. The FBI launched an international manhunt, but every lead ended in a dead end. David had learned well from his military days. The key to survival was misdirection, discipline, and timing. The Treasury heist became a turning point in the story of the ghost unit. It marked the end of their invincibility, the moment when their carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Mick's arrest shattered the team's cohesion. Their anonymity, once impenetrable, was now breached. Even today, the Treasury operation remains a case study in criminal audacity. How could a group of former soldiers plan and execute such a complex operation against one of the most secure facilities in the nation? The answer lay in their military training, their precision, and their ability to think like an army, only with the law on the other side. For David Cross, it was still only a temporary setback. He had survived, disappeared, and lived to plan again. For Mick, it was the end of the road, and for the authorities, it was the beginning of the most frustrating chase of their careers. A race to catch a man who had turned discipline into crime, honor into greed, and skill into a legend. The ghost unit had reached its most dangerous moment, and the next move would determine whether they became immortal in criminal history or were finally captured and erased from the world they had so cleverly haunted.